first keynote is Helena Jochberger, Vice President Global Lead Manufacturing at CGI, and we are talking the future of ecosystems and manufacturing. Hi Helena, how are you?
Hello Neil, so nice to see you again. Yeah. I hope you have been fine.
I'm very well, thank you. You have the privilege of kicking off the show today, so without further ado, the virtual floor is yours.
Absolutely. Thank you so much and welcome again to this webinar event. It's a big pleasure to be with you today. And yeah, my topic is the importance of collaborative ecosystems. Now, that sounds quite broad, but let me, with a little portion of humor, guide you through what that means. And in more specific, what it means for our manufacturing companies. Before we do so, I would like to start with a quote that you might have heard in the past. And this quote says, if you want to walk fast, sure, walk alone. But if you want to walk far, walk together. And I think this kind of quote has already some really interesting wisdom in itself. So let's go back to basic and start. Where does the idea of ecosystems come from? And of course, in the industries or even in science, we are mimicking a lot nature, right? So when you go back to the definition, what an ecosystem in nature is, you get a kind of a definition, semantics, that it is a network of living organisms, right? And their wider environment. And these are interacting to achieve a stable, and B, a sustainable balance. I think that ticks already some boxes. And especially when we move on towards the ecosystems in organizations, we are finding here also a multitude of players. So we have ecosystems, right? Vertical ecosystems, OEMs, we have tier 1 supplier, tier N suppliers. But we do not have only the vertical ecosystems. There is far more to them, and I'm going to explain the next couple of minutes a variety of these. And this multitude of players, they work together on the one hand side to create value and also jointly drive innovation, but more so as we are embedded in the context of global macro trends, they are also, I would say, a significant contributor to survive and thrive also in times of an economical slowdown that we are currently witnessing, right? So when we compare these two, on the one hand side, the ecosystems in nature, and on the other hand side in organizations, in both cases, what unifies them is that cooperational aspect for survival and for development. So good old Darwin, I would say, hits again. And it is really about symbiosis, interdependence, and flexibility, agility at the same time to respond to changes. And I've put you here these nice mushrooms because I thought that is a nice anecdote. A while ago, I was invited also in a collaborative ecosystem evening, and it was held in a zoo in front of a big aquarium, and the zoo director was giving also a keynote. And interestingly, the mushrooms, and not really the fruits that we can see out of the soil, but more so the mycelial network within the ground, within the soil, is really astonishing, because this is a kind of a wood world wide web, so to say, because these mycelial networks communicate, and they do not only communicate with their same species, but also with third-party species throughout information flow. So the data comes into the play, right? And data is already a good keyword. And we will see in the following how it responds or aligns to that. So keep the mushrooms for a moment in the backside of your thoughts. Now, why do manufacturers now need these ecosystems? And there is, and I was just mentioning a little bit the macro trends. So one aspect, especially for the manufacturing industry, we have very complex value chains, core value chains, right? You see on the right-hand side, the engine of an aircraft, and large aircraft OEMs really have up to 9,000 direct suppliers that are involved in the one way or the other with the aircraft design, the building, and so forth. So it is really impossible to have all of that, I would say, specialization under one roof, and therefore such a cooperation, collaboration is needed. These kind of strong partnerships gain of utmost importance also to diversify resources, right? So when we are living in times where we have demographical changes, and we do, when we are living in times where we have an economical crisis or slowdown, this diversification, bundling of resources can really be a solution building block to that challenge. And the topic of agility. And last but not least, we have this aspect of early market warnings. Yeah, whenever a critical event is being thrown from the outside in, collaborating in such an ecosystem can tremendously help. Another aspect is that I'm representing a systems integrator and a consultancy company, a global one. And we are witnessing since, I would say, nearly 2 decades right now, this digital and technology acceleration. And that means that we need to adapt so super quickly, right? So AI only being one topic about that. You need to read, you need to keep up your data literacy to really be competitive globally and to respond quickly to that market changes. Think, for example, again, about economical slowdown. What are the manufacturers doing at the moment? They are diversifying. On the one hand side, they are cost cutting. We know that. On the other hand side, they are diversifying into new product lines, into new geographies. That means you need to speed up also your product development cycles and reduce them. AI, or more specifically generative AI, can tremendously help in reducing these product development cycles. So there's no new opportunities. And of course, when you do that in strategic partnerships, that is far better than doing it alone, going back to my quote at the beginning. Another huge macro trend that still is tackling manufacturing industries heavily is the sustainability and, of course, the going back to a mutual growth. I already talked a little bit about the pooling of resources and expertise, but also in the field of environmental, social, and governance, collaborative ecosystems can tremendously help in achieving a higher sustainability and being more resilient. And we will see some live examples how this comes to that. So in a nutshell, ecosystems have data at the core. We have heard that before, right? And let me start quite broad what ecosystems are. And imagine yourself for a moment a society. We are all living in societies. And here comes the example of a so-called citizen supply chain ecosystem into play. Think a little bit back, 10, 15 years, we had that discussions around securing critical infrastructure. And then there came up a lot of scientific papers, also concepts for citizen supply chain security. And let me quickly guide you through that concept. So a citizen supply chain includes both critical and non-critical services. Stay for a moment at the two criticality number 1 and criticality number 2. Under criticality number 1, you would subsume all this critical infrastructure that you know from the past. So energy supply, information communication technology, also civil defense. Yeah, you need to defend your society. Criticality number 2, financial services, healthcare, also rescue and emergency services in case that some environmental disasters happen. And these are really define the services that sustain a resilient society. But interestingly, also coming from that concept, there are non-critical services. They are nonetheless significant and important to enhance a citizen's quality of life. So just to name communal activities, recreation, and entertainment. And in a nutshell, this applies for a society, but this applies also within the industries. Think back to my example with the aircraft engine. Of course, an aircraft OEM also has criticalities. Yeah, you have criticality number one, all things Mayday that make the airworthiness so important. You have criticality number two, for example, which implies severe deterioration of the functions of an aircraft. And then you have criticality number three, like flight entertainment and the kitchen and such. So you're getting the point. It's all about criticalities and securing these criticalities. When we look at the persona, and you can see here the citizen or the resident quite in the center. This is the point in time where, of course, all of our industries come into the play that support these essential needs of a well-functioning society. And manufacturing, obviously, being one of them, yeah, for the production, for the supply chains and such. And manufacturing in particular really supports other industries. Think, for example, when you go information communication technology into the space area, the satellites need to be produced, needs to be sourced. So you have all that supply chain aspects as well in the industries. And when we drill down and get a little bit more narrow right now, so leaving the society and zooming into the manufacturing industry, you can see here exemplary, a simplified supply chain ecosystem in manufacturing companies. So of course, there's a physical process included, yeah, where physical components are moved from A to B. You have all the upstream, like the sourcing and so forth, and you have the downstream, which is more including the delivery, the warehousing aspect of things. And of course, we have, as we are living in a digital world, the non-physical processes, yeah, where digital data exchange is happening of physical suppliers and such. And interestingly, we are not only in our vertical perception of things, like I said at the very beginning, right? So we are also leaving a little bit the swim lanes. And let me show you another aspect of this orchestrated collaboration, what that means in our time and how things are also changing. So you can see here in the middle of the slide, quite simplified again, a manufacturing company, an OEM for an aircraft. And you have physical suppliers with all that criticalities that I've just named. And you have also cross industries that are heavily involved in making that endeavor, the building of an aircraft, happen. Let me start at the top with the energy companies. We all know that we are living in the middle of an energy transition. Yeah? In the last 1.5 years, the energy costs have gone through the roof for the manufacturers. So this is a big, big aspect. Where do I get my energy from? What kind of energy is that? How reliable is that? Also in terms of sustainability, in terms of costing. Do my energy companies help me in regulatory compliance? And even when you think about the energy companies, they are leaving their own swim lane at the moment. Yeah. So think of a hydrogen producer, for example, green hydrogen producer. A byproduct of that manufacturing process is fertilizers. And all of a sudden, a classical energy company finds itself leaving the own swim lane and being in the middle of being a manufacturer. So that's an interesting aspect. Coming to the downside of that slide here as well, financial and insurance companies. Yeah, financial aspects gain of utmost importance. I said initially, economical slowdown. There's a lot of, let me say, cost cutting also in the sector of ICT. And of course, financial and insurance companies have a really crucial role here in the supply chain financing and financing the loans, investment in the infrastructure. So there is expected to be more collaboration in the next months and years to come, and not only in the vertical supply chain, but also across the industries. Again, from a view of a systems integrator and a consultancy company, The supply network is quite interesting from a technological point of view, right? Because you need to coordinate everything. Think, for example, about a warehousing, and think for a moment also about machine learning AI. So if you can predict that your warehousing is running out of parts, maybe 10, 15, 20 days upfront, and you have that data flow back into the capacity and production planning at the very beginning of the process loop, so to say, this is really something that enables digital continuity. Yeah, so this dynamic sourcing and really across the entire supply chain. I would like to give you another example of collaborative ecosystems. And some of you might have heard about Gaia X. Gaia X is an EU initiative that has provided a federated, secure infrastructure, and it enables data sovereignty, it enables interoperability, and it's also been designed to foster innovation. And under that Gaia X roof, there has been funded and founded in 2021 the Catena X. Catena X is an offspring, an automotive ecosystem, and it's a kind of an automotive industry related ecosystem that also respects that open and secure data infrastructure. And it promotes efficiency, innovation, and sustainability. Let me get that a little bit more practical. There are various work streams and working groups in Catena X, one being, for example, the circular economy. So there is an EU regulatory that is called the Eco Design for Sustainable Products Regulation, ECPR. And as of effective July 2024, it is mandatory to have for products and product parts a digital product passport in place. And that applies also to manufacturing, right? In 2026, this regulation is further extended also towards the EU battery regulation. So what Catena X provides here, and we as CGI, we are also involved in that collaborative ecosystem, is really to have digital product passports that comply with that regulation. And this is being started with the large automotive OEMs. But right now, it's really cascading through the vertical supply chain. And more also tier N suppliers are being onboarded. Interesting topic. Another topic of Catena X is, for example, the capacity management that also pays into the idea of that Catena, that supply chain ecosystem. As a summary, and we don't have multiple hours here, I would like to give you a little bit a motivation or a little bit a push that collaborative ecosystems are really a necessity to navigate supply chains and to tackle uncertain times. And these in three aspects: the technology, the environment, and the economy. And interestingly, as I have tried to share it with you also throughout the citizen supply chain, this applies both on a very large level, so it can encompass societies and industrial transformations, but it works as well on smaller scales. So think about your community-driven initiatives or think about local collaborations. When we bring the data into the aspect even more, we can really state that data-driven ecosystems hold an immense potential for innovation, for also growth and for sustainability. However, it needs playing rules, it needs trust, and it needs a common language, so the standards to adhere to in order to make it successfully happen. And with that, I would like to close this keynote for today, and I'm happy to take some questions. Back to you, Neil.
Thank you very much indeed. Right, let's go to the questions we've had in from the audience already. First of all, what development, either socially or technologically, are you seeing right now that you're most excited about?
Let me start with the technology. And of course, I'm also quite excited about the potential that AI brings. However, I do not see AI as a standalone technology. As I am an industry lady, I always attach it strongly towards the business process and try to find the right use cases that have the biggest lever, so to say, to bring value to a company.
Question from me. For you, what are the things that really hold back the development of these ecosystems? Is it technology? Is it individual company or department will? Where are the blockers? Where are the things that are holding things up?
The answer lies again in the data, Neil, I would say. So, of course, we need to make our homework first. Yeah. So we need to have a proper data strategy in place, a proper data management, that we can have the structuring of the data and the cleaning of the data that we need. And then later on, we can exchange. Another aspect in the collaborative ecosystems that holds us a little bit back, I would say, is for sure the will to collaborate. Yeah. So whether it's trust or mistrust, is always the question, what do I gain from an ecosystem? I think if the points, what can I gain from it, are positively answered, I think then the will to invest in that kind of matter is even higher.
And finally, for me, if people are wanting to sort of review where they are on their journey to reach this kind of ecosystem, how do you go about doing that? Because sometimes it can be very difficult to analyse your own performance. What would be your suggestion there?
Yeah, I mean, of course, there are a lot of systems integrators, consultancy companies like we are. We are doing a maturity assessment, assessments in that endeavor. I would say what also helps, especially in manufacturing, is talk to your OEM if you are a tier N supplier, because the OEMs usually, they are quite intensively engaged in the thought of ecosystems, and they also can provide help, and they have by definition, they are quite large. They have larger resources, larger departments, and they can help you also in getting your first step done. So it's always, I would say, ICT companies, manufacturers, and then, of course, you need the platforms, yeah, with the hyperscalers that are the right fit for your purpose and for your needs.
And we've just had a flood of questions coming in from the audience, so I'm going to come back to some of those before I wrap up. First one here from Jacqueline Crouch. What do you consider the main challenges with AI in manufacturing today?
The main challenges on AI is again the data. So what we see when we regard the complex value chain from design, from the production, supply chain, aftermarket, MRO, you have an entire data zoo to manage. Yeah. So the last, I would say, 10 to 14 years, we were heavily engaged in getting the shop floor connected, letting the machinery speak. And this first wave of transformation, meanwhile, has been conducted, but we are not finished with the transformation. So I would say we are moving now in the next stage of transformation. So it's data engineers, data scientists, having the right strategy in place, and then really looking for the use cases that bring the largest lever, plus also the differentiation between, is sometimes classical machine learning more applicable, or is it really generative AI, the latest kid on the block?
Question from Srini. Thank you very much for this. I'll just paraphrase what you've said in this question. We've been talking a lot about maybe larger enterprises who maybe have the resources to do this. For smaller or medium-sized businesses, how do you see them reacting to this change in landscape?
Yeah, very good question. Thank you for asking. And I think now is really the time for small and medium enterprises. Go back to the example of Catena X to get onboarded. And when you are starting your way in getting part of that collaborative ecosystem, I think there are already a lot of helpers on the way, a lot of enablers on the way, both from a consulting point of view with the roadmap, Quo Vadis, where do I need to go, where do I start, as well as technologically. In Catena X, there are so many onboarding technological best practices where you don't have to start from scratch and you don't have to start on your own. So I think approaching OEMs, approaching the partners in an ecosystem, and usually everything is publicly available. When you go to the site of Catena X, you will find who are the partners and you easily can contact them and ask them for their help. But I think especially for the small and medium enterprises, this would be now the right point in time to get onboarded.
Absolutely. Well, we are up on time. I'm afraid we couldn't get through all of the questions, but thank you so much for sending them in. Helena, always enjoy your company, always enjoy your insight. Thank you so much for joining us here at Manufacturing and Mobility Live.
Thank you so much, Neil.
A pleasure. Right, let's move on. Time for a very quick break.